Chandramouli is a best-selling author and one of India's finest writers in mythology, historical fiction and fantasy. From her debut novel, Arjuna, Saga of Pandava Warrior-Prince, to her latest release, Girl Talk, Anuja's work continues to captivate readers across the globe. Her acclaimed titles, such as Kamadeva, the God of Desire, Yama's Lieutenant Padmavati, and The Burning Queen and Mohini, the Enchantress, winner of the J.K. Papers and Times of India Popular Choice Author Award 2021, have established her as a modern classicist. Anuja Ma'am's books are published by Readermania, and her storytelling series is on Indian Epics is a hit on all platforms like YouTube and Spotify. Joining her is Shatrujeet Nath, a prolific author described as a new face of Indian mythology by DNA. Shatrujeet began his literary journey with the espionage thriller The Karachi Deception before transitioning to epic fantasy with the best-selling Vikramaditya Veergatha series, comprising The Guardians of Hala Hala, The Conspiracy of Meru, and more. His latest book, The Warlord of Ayodhya, that is a resurrection, is the second in a series of exploring Bharat's rule in Ayodhya during Rama's exile. Shatrujeet Sir's work, published by Jaico Publications, showcase his mastery of intricate narratives and gripping world building. Today, these two luminaries will take us on a 40-minute journey through the art of constructing vivid, immersive worlds in the realm of Indian mythology. Please join me in welcoming Anuja Chandramouli Ma'am and Shatrujeet Nath Sir to this enlightening conversation. Over to you, ma'am.
Derived from mythology. I don't actually write mythology. She actually writes, her work is closer and mirrors mythology closer than mine do. But having said that, very quickly, for those of you who are not aware of this idea of world building, what we talk about world building is essentially when it's a concept that's used in fantasy and science fiction, because when we say, if we are setting a story in the world of say Bombay of today, you don't really need to world build, you know what Bombay is. But we have absolutely no idea what the world of say, you know, of the Sangam period in Tamil Nadu was like. We have no idea what Persia was during the rule of some Shah or whatever it is, you know, or in science fiction. So world building is essentially the world in which stories of fantasy, mythology, science fiction take place. And, you know, those worlds have their own laws of physics, sometimes their own laws of, you know, science or the absence of science, magic, whatever it is. So that's really what we're going to talk about. And that's really what we do a lot in terms of, you know, how do you kind of create that world which becomes immersive and believable to all of you readers. That's really the challenge that we authors face. And that's what we're going to be talking about. Anuja, you want to add something to that before we start? Okay, so actually, you know, one of the things that I have, before even we get to world building, so as you know, Anuja's, as we went through the introduction, we saw that Anuja basically does, you know, writes on mythology. Her first book was on Arjuna. Now that is actually quite an obvious character to kind of pick, right? When we talk about mythology, we know that, you know, the Pandavas were a very, so, you know, any of the Pandavas is a, so Nakul and Sahadev to a lesser extent, but otherwise well known. After you finished Arjuna, then subsequently, you know, you wrote about Kamadeva. Now, Kamadeva is not a most, you know, it's not a very obvious character to pick. You would say that, okay, after Arjuna, let me do Karna, for example. You know, that would be the logical kind of leap that you would take. So then you did Kamadeva. Then you also have a series which is Yama's Lieutenant, and I am very, very intrigued by that particular series. We'll talk about that as well. So basically what I want to know is that how do you determine, even before you get to the world of, you know, world building, how do you determine whose story am I going to tell? And why do you decide that it is going to be so-and-so character's story? How do you get there?
Thank you so much. And I'll be directing that question right back at you, so I'll give you a heads up. So Just a second, I'm sorry. Yeah, so I don't choose my characters as a rule. My characters tend to choose me, and it all began with Arjuna. And as an aspiring author at the time, I was just thinking of all the authors I've admired. For instance, I used to love reading the Archie comics, and Betty Cooper there wanted to become a writer when she grows up. So the advice she gets, she was asked to keep a journal. So I used to keep a journal as well. My journal was not, like Anne Frank's or anything of literary value. I mostly wrote about, I was in a convent school and I'd write, we had chocolate cake today, something like that. So it wasn't exactly brilliant stuff, but I kept a journal. And they always, the advice they give for aspiring authors in these books, which I loved, where even in Little Women, I used to love Jo March, who wanted to grow up and become an author. So the advice they're given is to write about things they love, things that you care about deeply, because this is a massive commitment. It's like a marriage. You can't just get in there, dive in on the deep side and hope to survive. You just have to make that commitment. So with these characters, when I asked myself, okay, so which character do I love? What do I love? What do I care about deeply? It was very simple, because Arjuna is the great love of my life. I've been hearing the story of the Mahabharata from when I was a little girl. And Arjuna, love at first sight. That first description I read about him, about how he was so special, and when he was born, flowers rained down, and Indra was his father, and everything, there was love right there. So, it's never, I'm very fickle, by the way. So I used to, you like someone as a kid doesn't mean you'll grow up and like the same person. But Arjuna has been a constant. I've always loved him. I think I always will. So it had to be my first book, the love of my life. And while writing Arjuna, one of the characters there is Pradyumna, Krishna's son. And in the book, they don't exactly love each other. And I was a bit surprised with that. So Pradyumna because I love Arjuna, I don't understand people who don't love Arjuna back. So I think the guy stayed in my head after that. So that's the fun part of research. When you do world building, as you know, research is a huge part of it, because that's the foundation on which you're going to build. Because mythology is practically religion for some people. So, I don't believe in just messing around with sacred cows without a foundation to stand on. So while doing the research, Pradyumna cropped up, and as you know, he was Kamadeva reborn as Pradyumna. So I was fascinated by this lesser known character, who is the god of desire, which is considered to be the only, this weapon which destroyed which kind of defeated even Shiva. So that was something which intrigued me. So Kamadeva happened, and while writing Kamadeva, during the research process, I found out that he's a devotee of the goddess, the mother goddess Shakti. So she was there in my head at that time. And Shakti, one of the themes in Shakti is that whichever road you take, whichever path you take, your end destination is her feet, which is a very comforting thing. When you think that her compassion is available to everyone. And so while I was writing that, I'm a contrarian. So on the one side, you have this soothing belief that no matter how much you screw up or whatever, there's compassion. Compassion is not, you're never exempt from grace. So that was a beautiful idea. And then I was, Shakti, the book itself happened because I was doing online work and content writing, and I was following the Nirbhaya case. So I think that's a case that, as you know, that shook India. And I think none of us have recovered from that. About how awful and evil it was. And at that time, I think we all were looking for something to feel safer, about, embracing something, a belief that's empowering. So Shakti happened from that. Which also brings another question which Shakti posed. What kind of people belong in hell? Who are these people who, before they are accepted into that grace, that compassion, they have to go through a period of punishment? For what kind of crimes? So the research I was doing at the time, it immediately became dark. I was reading the works of the Marquis de Sade, Salo, the 120 Days of Sodom. So you read that, you do your research. That was the question I asked myself, and somehow this book showed up. So you read about the kind of evil people and the kind of things they do, and that's how Yama's Lieutenant happened. So every book for me leads to the next book. So it's how it happens. So I don't want to go on and on about it, but it's an organic process for me.
So in a way, but one question is that when you decided that, you found, you were on the quest for, you were trying to figure out Arjuna, and you found Pradyumna. What made you go to Kamadeva as opposed to, dive more into Pradyumna himself in the Mahabharata as opposed to Kama. Why did you choose to pick Kamadeva as opposed to Pradyumna?
Oh, see, again, I didn't think too much about it. I'm not one of the world's great thinkers. I'm not planning that much. It just happens organically. When I was doing the research on Pradyumna, you start researching more and more and more about Kama. And Kama, I had a certain impression of him, a mistaken impression of him as a ladies' man, as some sort of Casanova figure. But he turned out to be very sweet, a very, very gentle presence. All the gods have these amazing weapons, right? Indra has his thunderbolt, and all of them have sexy weapons out there. This guy, he has, a flower-tipped bow and all that. So I was thinking, see, here's a guy how many guys do you know who choose for guys? I find that I don't want to stereotype guys either, but I'm saying most men, violence seems to be aspirational. It's like you're the hot dude, bad boy, only if you're being violent and bad tempered. I mean, there's a reason Virat Kohli has the fan following he has, back when he was a bad tempered Delhiwala and he was aggressive, and that's aspirational. Whereas the gentle dude, the sensitive dude, I think guys like Kama are very sexy. The guys who are nice, not just because they want to get in your pants, but because they're for its own sake. They're nice for nice's sake. Kama was that guy. So I really loved this guy. I thought he was very sweet, that he chose not to get involved in the bitter battles fought between the Devas and Asuras. He did his own thing. And in his own way, he was more powerful than all the rest of the gods in the pantheon. Because all are slaves to desire. And that is his domain. So that fascinated me about Kama. And Pradyumna, I felt, was a part of him.
Yeah, that's actually quite interesting because, when I look at characters, and I think it always happens that, you find a character that you find fascinating, and then you decide that, this is the character that you want to kind of tell the story about. Sometimes it also happens that when you set out to, explore a character, you then start finding out other characters who are, probably more interesting, I don't know if it's happened with you sometimes, but it's happened sometimes with me that I start writing about a character, but then I find there's another character who's more interesting, and then of course then you're kind of divided because you know your stories about this character, but you want to write about that character. So yeah, it's really fascinating. So again, continuing in the space of world building now, specific to world building. When you tell stories of mythology and history. And I think for a lot of us who have been who have grown up through the 1960s, 70s, 80s, a lot of our exposure to Indian history and mythology has been through Amar Chitra Katha. Okay. I think most of us have read Amar Chitra Kathas. In fact, my entire inspiration for, I won't say inspiration for writing Vikramaditya, Veergatha, but to tell a story about Vikramaditya stemmed from a cover of Vikramaditya, which was an Amar Chitra Katha cover, which I remember even today. Okay. So it was that cover that I saw and I said, oh, what a cool guy this guy is. And of course I never meant to write a story on him, but then 40 years later I did end up writing. So my point is that because we have derived so much of our visual referencing, our cultural referencing, even the way our characters look, speak, behave, all of it comes from Amar Chitra Katha. How much of that has kind of influenced you? I'll come to why I asked you this question later, but let me ask you that. So how much of that has played in?
Oh, see, you grow up reading Amar Chitra Katha. So I had a huge Amar Chitra Katha collection, and I'll always be grateful to Amar Chitra Katha for inculcating this love for Indian mythology in me. But as you grow older, you realize that Amar Chitra Katha was originally written for children. And Indian mythology, if you ask me, at its core, it's for adults. It's definitely, a lot of it isn't suitable for children. For instance, but the thing is, in India, we have the oral tradition of storytelling as well, side by side with something like Amar Chitra Katha. So originally, you grow up hearing grandma's stories. And I remember Baby Krishna's story was the first story I heard. Okay, and I must have been only 2 at the time, and I knew the story of Baby Krishna by heart. I had that crazy memory. My grandmom used to love showing me off when guests come home. She'll tell me the story and I knew it by heart. So she'll make me sit on the table, all her guests will be seated around, and she'll say, now you tell the story of Krishna. And I will say just the way she said it, and they'll all be clapping. So that's where it started, the performative, whether I'm a dancer, storyteller, it started right there. And the thing is, I remember the way she said it, Kamsa, he picked up all Krishna's siblings, newborn siblings, by their feet and he dashed their brains out. This is exactly how my grandmom told it to me. You know, back then we didn't have sensors. People felt that children process stuff better than adults, so they trusted you with this stuff. Now if I go to a preschool and tell this story, I'll be in a lot of trouble. So the thing is, kids love violence, but when Amar Chitrakatha made all this more palatable, which means over the years I found that only part of the story through Amar Chitrakatha. Just to give an example, I found it highly problematic that Krishna, Draupadi, Rama, they're all dark-skinned people. And in India, this colorism is such a huge thing. We like white people for some strange reason, the color of the conqueror. We're selling fairness creams. And yet, you have somebody like Draupadi and Krishna who are considered ridiculously good-looking people. Why not show them as dark-skinned, extremely good-looking people? It would have helped a generation of kids who feel so insecure about their looks on the basis of color. So, when I did the storytelling session on YouTube, I wanted to have illustrations, So I got these illustrators to have illustrations interspersed during the storytelling session. And they keep going with blue-skinned Rama, Krishna. And I'm like, have you seen any blue people? I haven't. Then why do we have blue people in our Indian mythology? So this is what I felt that, we need to return the stories to their roots. I love Amar Chitrakatha. This is not a diss. But for me personally, that influence was something I had to outgrow.
Correct.
And do my own thing, return to the roots. And these stories are messy, they're brutal, all kinds of adult themes from incest to animal sex, you name it, you've got it. It's all there in Indian mythology. I didn't make it up. I'm not being provocative. As you know, it's right there. If you do your research, this is what you're going to find. And I feel, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. You're trying to sanitize this, sterilize this. You lose what's beautiful and the part of it that truly speaks to your heart.
Actually, the reason why, and I initially got some flack for it, but then, once I kind of explained it to people, they kind of got it. Like, in the Veergatha series, Indra is like, he's the villain. He's one of the villains in the story. And so my visualization of Indra is actually, when you read Amar Chitrakatha, Indra is this, this very kind of, this weak character who's constantly running to Shiva or running to Shiva for help. And I somehow never quite understood how can this guy be the king of the Devas. I mean, the king of the Devas has to be somebody who has power, authority, who knows how to flex authority. So when I kind of portrayed him as that, he's a giant character who's like, he's like a mountain, almost like a mountain in terms of size and build and like, for example, in the Vedas, there is a reference to him having actually reddish brown hair. Okay, so the fact that he could actually, he's not black hair, which might, he's got blue eyes. So you almost give him a kind of a Norse Slavic kind of look. Okay, and initially there was obviously some amount of, because people are not used to seeing Indra that way. So there was this, how can this be Indra? But then when you break it down and you look at the character and what he stands for, you realize that he has to be that. He can't be the Amar Chitrakatha version of Indra. So I think that's really what I was trying to figure out. How do you kind of so in your storytelling when you
I have a question for you. I wanted to know why you chose Bharat for as the protagonist in your Warlord of Ayodhya series, because I feel that he's in Lord Rama's shadow, obviously. Just wondering how come you went with this guy. Indra, the villain avatar of him, I really enjoyed it in the Vikramaditya series. So, but this was something I was curious about. How come you chose Bharata?
So for me, actually, the Ramayana, we say the Ramayana is a story of 4 brothers, okay. But in reality, it's only the story of 2 brothers. In the Ramayana, it's the story of Rama and Lakshmana. Nobody cares about Bharat and Shatrughna. Like I said, it's actually, you say Panch Pandava, but we are actually only interested in Arjuna, Bhima, and to an extent Yudhishthira. Nakula and Sahadev are appendages, basically. Nobody really cares for it. So, when I was looking at the Ramayana, and I'd been working on a version of the Ramayana for some time, and for different reasons, I realized that the whole Ramayana in a way actually happens because of Bharat. I mean, if Bharat was not there, then Kaikeyi would not have demanded Ram's exile. Ram would not have gone into exile. No Sita Haran would have happened. No Lanka Dahan would have happened. Nothing would have happened, right? So the story happens in many ways because of a character, and that character is so completely overlooked by the epic. Okay, so I thought that it would be interesting to actually look at the story of what fascinated me about Bharat is that Bharat is someone who never grew up in Ayodhya. He always, grew up in KK, which was, KK's motherland. So, which is probably in today's Punjab or somewhere in that area. So, Bharat has never grown up in Ayodhya. He was never trained to become a king. He was like, he always knew that Ram would be king. I mean, it was accepted, it was understood. So, he had no aspirations to be king. He was very happy living in KK, probably even insecure. In many ways, Bharat was insecure of that shadow of Ram, and Ram was everyone's pet. He was a guy who's insecure, does not want to stay in Ayodhya, lives in KK. One fine day he is called and told that your father is dead, your elder brother who is supposed to have become king is in exile, and he's for 14 years he's not going to come back, and you have to come and rule Ayodhya. And this guy has no training in being a king. He comes here, he doesn't have the love of his people. So I thought it was just an interesting story to tell from a point of view of what would you do if one fine day you were picked up like this and put in the middle of a crisis. So now you've got in America, you have this concept called designated survivor. Like if the president dies and the entire, your entire Senate dies, there is someone who's designated to become president. So it's this. And in fact, there is a series called Designated Survivor on Netflix or Amazon or whatever. So it's that whole. So Bharat in many ways is the designated survivor. And so I thought it would just be interesting to look at that character, as everyone knows Ram's story, everyone knows Lakshman's story, nobody knows this man's story. So it was just that. So yeah. So again, coming back to this concept of world building, the other very fascinating thing that I find when we do world building, and I've seen a lot of authors struggle with this. Not only in world building is one aspect of it. Plot, many authors kind of get stuck in, the same plot. Like if you take Alistair MacLean, there are I think 4 books of his which basically have the same plot. So it's a bad guy who then turns out to be a good guy who's got on a mission, that kind of stuff. When you are telling a mythological story or a historical even for that fact, how do you kind of make sure that the plots that you use or the plot devices or don't repeat themselves? Because at the end of the day, if you are telling a story of Arjuna and then Kamadeva and then whoever, it's for us right now as consumers, they all belong to the same era. Okay, how do you kind of differentiate those words?
No, see, that's something I do by focusing on the character. Okay, so I think my stories are more character driven than plot driven. So I favor a very organic style of writing, which is fleshed. I already mentioned that the research is my foundation. Now you will find that when you do your research, there's absolutely zero consensus, despite what mythologists and historians want you to believe. You do your research on a historical character or a mythological character, it doesn't matter. There are so many different versions, regional version, the original version. What is the original version? We had an oral tradition in India, as I mentioned already. We were not good at writing things down and archiving them like the British. That happened only when the British came along, which means a lot of the material we have preserved and have been handed down to us, they were written by probably Jesuit priests, probably, no wait, they were Protestant at the time, I'm guessing, so whatever. So they are looking at this heathen religion probably, so there's a little element of bias in the written narrative, and yet we all claim that no, according to the original version this is what happened, according to Valmiki this is what happened, as if you were actually sitting there and listening to Valmiki's story, which Valmiki himself did not recite it originally, one of his disciples did. And when you pass on these stories from generation to generation, it changes according to the needs of the age, right? So I try to capture the essence of a story. I am not looking at the definitive version of the story. I do not claim to be a scholar. I don't call myself an expert. I'm just somebody who loves stories, who lives for the stories. So when I pick a character, while doing the research, I've noticed that there are gaps in the narrative. just to give a small example, if you take a character as complicated as Shakti. Now in the original myths, if you go back to the Rig Veda, if you're going to go back all the way to the Vedic age, there's a story there about Indra chasing away the goddess of dawn. She was known as Ushas back in the day, and her worship was very, very prevalent. And there's a story about Indra chasing her away. They don't elaborate, there's just, hints of incest. We do the certain things shouldn't be, mentioned, blah, blah. People are dancing around. So if you study those... yeah, exactly. Yama and Yami also were accused of incest. So there's a lot of dancing around, lack of consensus. So you try to fix the holes in the narrative with an educated guess, which is where I let the characters speak for themselves. It's like you're immersing yourself in the flow of the narrative. You're staying outside your own way. You're not, fixating on the minutiae of it. You're just being a part of the flow. And I love that it's an organic process where you think, okay, I think the character is going to do this, but the character turns around and surprises you. I describe it like this in the interest of simplicity. It's like birthing a child. The child carries your DNA. That doesn't mean you are the owner of the child. No, you don't own those characters. They are your daughter or your son exists independently from you. They have autonomy. They have minds of their own. They think for themselves. They act for themselves, which is how it is with the characters also. They surprise you. They are difficult. They are stubborn, and it's lovely to interact with them on that scale, which means that, all my stories, I feel that's why I keep stressing there's a certain organic evolution there, where I'm not fixating too much on the details, and yet the details manifest. So you're just capturing the essence of the story. And so no two story will be alike, there are infinite variations of it. What about you? How does it go for you? Since I've noticed that you kind of craft your stories, like these very exciting actioners, which has all these thrilling elements. So how does the process work for you?
So, so one of the things like I did, and because, I tend to be more, in fact, the Bharat story, which is Warlord of Ayodhya, is still more character-driven in that sense, because it's ultimately Bharat's story. But the Vikramaditya series is a lot more plot-driven. Okay. So, what happens is that I do find that, because I don't want to repeat myself, as I said, so one of the things that I did in the Vikramaditya series was that Vikramaditya and his, the Navaratnas, the nine gems in his form. So in mine, because it's a fantasy and it's not a historical, they have superpowers. Okay. So each of them has a superpower of some sort. So it's like a Marvel universe sort of a thing, Each character has some superpower which they use to their advantage or whatever it is. So when I finished the Veergatha series, and then I decided that I realized that I wanted to do the Warlord of Ayodhya series. One of the things that I was obviously faced with was that, will my characters have superpowers? Because I knew, as you said, I like to have large-scale epic battle sequences. I like huge, set piece sequences, all that stuff. So I knew I wanted all of that. But so will my characters have superpowers? And then I realized that if they have superpowers, what is the superpower they have? Those fellows have already had that. Somebody will have vanishing ability to vanish. Somebody will have extra strength. Somebody will have something else. There are only 20 superpowers. So giving these characters superpowers is useless, and I'm only repeating myself. So that is when I said that in Warlord of Ayodhya, I will not have superpowers. Nobody will have superpowers, but what we will have is this element of magic, which anyone and everyone can tap into. Which means if you are it's almost like technology, magic, and it's been said that when you don't understand technology, it is basically magic. So it's basically like technology. It exists, and if you are able to tap into it, those who tap into that magic better, they are able to use that magic to their benefit. So I think that's really the way you kind of try and figure out how to kind of differentiate between these things. It's tricky. It's not always easy. But yeah, I think that's really good. But the interesting thing you said that, and you said that no two stories are the same. No two myths are the same, or the same myth has 75 versions to it, and which is actually so true even about history in many ways. Like I remember once I was in a room. It was a writer's room for a show we were working on. The show never got made. It was a historical, and there were two historians in the room, and then they kind of we made a creative call. We said, okay, we can do it this way. and just for drama, which is not historically correct, but it does not really matter. The two historians took a great exception to it. Yeah. They said, no, that's not the way, you're changing history. So I told them, the day all of you historians agree on something, that day please come and tell us how to tell stories. Before that, please don't do that, because you two can't agree on something, and then you want me to do it. So it's completely bizarre. Yeah, I completely get that. So, yeah, again, now when it comes to world building, mythological characters I understand. Take mythology, and again it's character building. How do you do that when you do your historicals, like you've done it on Pandava? Right? When you do your historicals, what becomes your base for doing the world building? How do you do your research for that?
Honestly, I don't think there's that huge gap between history and mythology. I've said it before, I'll say it again. History has elements of mythology, and mythology has elements of history to it. So, the way I see it, as usual, I rely on the research, and when it comes to history, you go for opposing viewpoints. So, if you're writing about Prithviraj, you write, you read the narratives left behind by historians who were there in his time, as well as the Westerners, everything, and you try to piece it together for yourself. And as I pointed out earlier, you will find there are lots of gaps in the stories, in the research itself. So you try to, fix it in an organic way. Again, you try to get these characters. I'm a psychology major also, so I'm trying to figure out why these characters did the things they did. Somebody like Prithviraj or Padmavati, and somebody like Tughlaq. Tughlaq is seen as one of history's villains, but actually in some ways, if you look at it, he was a man far ahead of his times. And if everyone knows the story about how he had a traitor chopped up, that it was a relative of his, Bahauddin Gurshap. He had him chopped up and served as biryani to his own relatives, So you call him a tyrant, but he was not that different from others in his period. Even Prithviraj Chauhan, who's considered a hero, he also wasn't exactly kind to traitors, because you couldn't afford to be. Appearances were everything. So power corrupts everyone equally, whether you're a man or a woman or a child. Power and prestige, it corrupts everyone equally. So I'm trying, whether it's history or mythology, I'm trying to understand what makes these characters tick. So to give an example again, let me go back to somebody like Ganga. Now Ganga is stereotyped. Everyone worships her as Mother Ganga. But when I approach this character, I'm trying to figure out, what was Ganga like as a girl. And if you approach the research with fresh eyes, you realize that she's such a wild, fierce-spirited woman, So the way she's originally approached by Brahma, and all the rishis, they approach her, the devas approach her, and they ask her to perform penances to win Shiva's hand. They're saying, see, you have this demon, Surapadma, Taraka, they're all there, and we need Shiva to, he had immersed himself in penances after the death of Sati. They said he has to marry, he has to enter the householder's life, he has to invest in his children again, and you have to go perform penances and win his hand. And she says, why should I? Why can't he perform penances to win my hand? So she's called the crooked one. So that's the fierce spirit of Ganga. And later we know the story about her from the Mahabharata, right? Where she's asked to sacrifice her children immediately after they're born. Just imagine you're asking a mother to carry this child and then kill the child immediately. That's what's being asked. You can look at the bigger picture, etc. But how can you bring yourself to ask that to a mother? So when I approached it like that, I figured based on what I knew of this Ganga. So in my version, she goes to the gods and says, you want this favor from me? It doesn't come for free. I will choose satisfaction over sacrifice every single time. And that is something I felt this message needed to be, passed on to future generations of women. Because girls are told they should always play the sacrifice card. Let the men eat first, then you eat if there's anything left over. So I thought, why? I don't think this is in character for Ganga. So she says, give me satisfaction and then I will make the sacrifice you ask of me. And so when, she dictates her own terms. For those who don't know, Ganga was cursed because she was in love with Mahabhisha. Mahabisha, who was a mortal. So it was forbidden, the love between a mortal and an immortal. And she was cursed to be born and to experience this process of being torn apart from a loved one. So that's what happens with Shantanu and Ganga. Shantanu is Mahabisha reborn. So they had to play this out again, being forcibly torn apart. So she said, I want love, but I want the pleasure without the pain. Okay, so she says she wants to experience love that is perfect. She doesn't want to experience loss. So she says, give me this gift, and then we will talk about sacrificing. So this is where I took a little creative license, and this is again based on the research I did. I call it fiction based on fact. So there are certain versions which suggest that Radha was Ganga. So when she demands satisfaction over sacrifice, she's born as Radha so that she can experience the Ras Leela and enjoy this beautiful love without judgment, without the slings. We're always told the flip side, love stories have splendid beginnings and sordid endings. She said, I want to be spared that. And that's what she experienced. They say their love is eternal, that Shiva himself preserved this love of theirs, and it's timeless and all. So I thought that was a very romantic, interesting concept, and that's how I played it.
Yeah, it's actually... This is gone, yeah. So it's actually interesting because, we were just now talking about how you kind of, how you interpret characters. And I was just having a conversation sometime back with lunch over with one of my other panelists. And in fact, she was also asking me the same thing. She said that, in the Warlord series, like she was asking me, I was telling her, who the characters are. So she said that obviously KK is a villain. So I actually told her that in my story, KK is not a villain, okay? Because I think she's a woman who knew exactly what she wanted, and she's demonized because it ended up in the exile of Ram. But she knew exactly what she wanted. So in fact, one of the things I keep, like Bharat confronts her in the story, and Bharat says that, why are you so selfish? And she says, I have one child. And so I have a right to be selfish about that one child. Your father had 4 sons, yet he's displays favoritism towards one. Why? So her point is that if you are my favorite, it's because I have one son. Your father has 4 sons, yet he picks a favorite. How is that fair? So I think these are really spaces that we as storytellers can kind of play with, and that's. Are we running short of time? Okay. Does anyone have any questions on this? Anyone? Yes. Please go ahead.
Let's make the devil's advocate here.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Question to both of you. This genre of mytho-fiction, is it reaching saturation point now? Every writer is jumping onto the bandwagon.
Yeah, definitely. See, at one point they were saying in Bollywood that sex and Shah Rukh Khan sells. It's the same story over here also. When something does well commercially, people beat that cash cow to death. They milk that cash cow to death. So we are in that zone where everyone, because even your publishers will say, if it's a hot genre, then the publishers want more and more and more of the same. So you have everyone jumping onto the bandwagon. So yeah, it's definitely been done to death. But at the same time, mythology is timeless, You can plumb the depths all your life and you'll still be floundering because there's so much to it. So no need to throw the baby out with the bathwater. So yes, there is space for mythology, provided we are not going to, cater to populist choices and the lowest common denominator. You should maintain a certain standard, and I think it should be okay. There's always room for mythology in our life.
Yeah, I completely agree. So the lowest hanging fruit right now is actually Kalki. Okay. So virtually every second book is a book on that. So it just kind of lends itself because it's kind of futuristic. You can tell your own story because Kalki still hasn't happened. You can tell your own story. So I think that's really what it is. But again, as long as you're able to find interesting ways to tell, either you find interesting stories or interesting characters or interesting ways of telling those same stories. So I think, how do you now retell the Ramayana? I think, I don't know, we'll have to find a new way to tell the Ramayana. If we're able to find a very interesting way, that will be fascinating in itself. Also, I think really see, ideas are nothing. It all boils down to execution. And as long as we execute well, we can, otherwise it's just one more of the same thing. Yeah, anyone else? Yes.
So it's a question to both of you. When you write about a character or a perspective that you want to show, and as you said that it's also about the generation and the era that we are living in, so that kind of message has been passed. Have you ever experienced a force in your own mind sometimes you have a perspective and it is very difficult to write it down, and you are in a battle with yourself. Maybe somewhere you yourself don't agree with something, and then there is something very much related to it that needs to be told. I am not sure if I am very clear.
Yeah, I get it. No, see, I get what you're saying, because most of us are violently in conflict with ourselves, you know. We are pulled by opposing impulses, and that reflects in your work also, which is why to experience freedom in writing, it comes from a place of intense discipline. You know, you can't just saunter in there and hope the magic will happen. You need to do a lot of, he spoke about the magic very beautifully, about how it manifests in different ways. So for instance, book number 4 for me after Shakti was supposed to be Ganesha. I was fascinated by the child of Prakriti, and I had a concept for Ganesha. But at that point, I'm also a classical dancer, so I performed my very first stage solo, and it was a piece on Kartikeya. You know, so I do my work very seriously. Like, I'll practice over and over and over and over again to the point where I'm going to faint and fall, and then I'll push some more. You know, all for that few minutes on stage. And so while I was dancing, you know, I played this song and I'm dancing, and I couldn't hear the music at one point because I could hear peacocks screeching in the background. You know, peacocks don't have a sweet voice. So I was thinking, God damn it broke my concentration, which means I have to do it 10 more times, not just once. So I switch off the music and I go look outside, and as far as the eye could see, there were peacocks. It was like, you know, it was ridiculous. I had goose flesh. They were just standing there. And then suddenly within seconds, they were all gone. In a place like Sivakasi, as far as the eye can see, peacocks. You know, so Kartikeya is in there. And then somehow he just refused to leave my head after that. So I told them I'm going to write about Kartikeya, not Ganesha. And my publishers were sweet. And after the book was written, again, warring impulses, I did so much work to allow that character to, you know, just go wild and do his own thing. And after this was done, I performed another solo Kartikeya piece at the Tiruchendur temple. That's a temple built for Kartikeya. In Tamil Nadu, he's huge. So in that temple, it's where, they say it's where he defeated Sura. So I got a chance to perform in the temple, and there's a little place there where they tell you to, I hate temples, the crowds and all, okay, honestly. So I was standing apart. They said, come, you have to listen. You've written a book about Kartikeya and all. So I went, they said, place your ear here. You'll hear the sea. And that's like Kartikeya speaking to you. So I placed my ear there like a skeptic, very reluctantly. And then I could hear it here, in this ear. You know, so you can say I have a fertile imagination, whatever, but I do believe that the magic, if you allow it to happen, you put your heart and soul into your work, in some small way you'll feel the magic. Of course you can dismiss me and say, oh, hyper writer trying to sell her work, whatever, but I know what I heard, because I stood in the damn queue again. I didn't say anything to anyone. I stood again. Everybody was saying, see, I can hear it when I place my ear here. So it's a way of saying you're like running after something, but it's right there. You know, it felt very playful, very much like the Kartikeya I knew from my book. So I hope that helps.
We would love to take more questions, but I think we are...
Thank you so much. It was such an interesting session and a fresh perspective on mythology. And thank you so much.